As America starts the nomination process for the presidential elections, there's a strong feeling of excitement and apprehension as the hunt for the next president of America begins. This is State of America. What a month it has been for American politics. The American election of 2016 is really starting to take shape across the whole of the United States and is equally grabbing the world's attention, especially one individual in particular with a very suspect haircut, but we'll get on to him later. This month saw confused Brits trying to figure out the sport of American football at 2 in the morning in the form of the annual Super Bowl, but the result wasn't the main talking point. Beyoncé's halftime performance seemed to be the most interesting aspect of the event. Accompanied by a troupe of backup dancers in Black Panther uniforms, it acted as a rallying call for the Black Lives Matter movement, 50 years after its initial formation in 1966. Could the election in 2020 see Beyoncé take on Kanye? Who knows in politics? Finally, it's he who must not be named, Mr. Donald Trump. In his latest bid to become president, Trump called Democrat Bernie Sanders a communist. Yet, in latest polls, he has a vast majority. So, is he a serious contender? That's all to be discussed on today's show and much more. But before that, let's remind ourselves of some of the big names in the race to become president. Joining me on this evening's show is Chris Johnson. Thanks for having us, Chris. Let's get straight into it and talk about Mr. Donald Trump. Is he a serious contender in this race?
Yeah, I think you've got to class him as a serious contender. He's got the most votes, he's won the most primaries, he's gathering support as he goes. He's the only contender going from strength to strength, really.
It's surprising considering the amount of controversial issues he talks about. How has he managed this?
I think we underestimate how conservative a country America is and how, at the start of his campaign, he focused on not being politically correct, and that did well for him, and he's just kept it up, really.
Is there sort of a method in his madness, in a way?
Yeah, I think there is. I think he's realised that he can be relatively outrageous and just trade on his image of a billionaire who's had setbacks but has always come good.
He seems to be the only one as well brave enough to talk about the issues that arguably Americans want to hear.
Yeah, that's right, and they are worried about immigration, they are worried about, and America's got a history of being paranoid about stuff like communism, and he's feeding into that paranoia about stuff like Muslim culture and everything.
Well, we've heard in the last 24 hours that Jeb Bush will no longer be running in his father's and brother's footsteps to become president. How do you think this will affect the election?
I think it'll have a big effect on the Republican Party because he was their chosen candidate, really. They gave him the most backing, he had the most money, and Trump's just blown that apart. So where they turn to next, whether they turn to Rubio or Cruz, or some of them will turn to Trump, so it can only be good for him, I think.
Do you think arguably Bush got scared?
I think he was. I think he was a terrible campaigner. Trump out-campaigned him, whether you like what Trump says or not. He's just more of a showman.
He's almost confident enough to just beat Bush in a way. We could talk for ages about Trump and Bush, but thanks to some insights. Now, Trump has openly voiced his opinion against several minority groups. So we met up with John Bellamy to talk about the current situation in both America and here in the UK. Let's hear what he had to say.
He seems to have caught the public spirit in a lot of ways. I mean, this is what amazes me. He wants to close the country to Muslims. the very foundation, the very cause of America. The word America, A-M-E-R-I-C-A, means the I am race. This is a spiritual connection, a coming together, a country for everybody who is religiously persecuted to come to America and be free. That is the foundation of what America stands for. I think he's becoming popular because he's reading what the people are thinking. But what you think and what you say are two different things. What you think and what you say and then what you actually do is another thing altogether. Again, we may think that the Muslims are causing a problem, but we need to look at the history about why are the Muslims a problem? What have we done that's created it? We seem to think that also the government and the politicians run the country. They don't. Corporate power runs the country, big business, because they got the money, they got the power. I mean, like their penis and their car to match. You know, they're always going to have a big car because they want a big penis, but they haven't got a big penis, they'll have a big car just to make up for it. Get a grip, you child! I think there's one word. There's only one word you need to do with these politicians. Behave! Because they're all little boys with big weapons misbehaving.
Some very interesting points there by John. He's a bit of a character. Do you agree with some of the things he was saying?
He's got a colourful way of expressing himself. I agree with the tone, or some of the things he says, but not perhaps the way. I think, like I said before, America's a very strange and conservative country, really, and we underestimate how odd it is sometimes.
You could argue he had a point about how politics these days is all about corporation and money, and sort of has missed its ethos and focused on the people, what politics is about.
I think really it's always been about money and everything, and it's like the City of London's tied up with the government and on both sides in this country, and yeah, Wall Street and corporations. I mean, Apple's almost bigger than some countries, isn't it? So it's going to be tied up together.
We also mentioned how Trump is opposed to same-sex marriage, which is really interesting, I think, because for me, I believe it's a step back in American politics rather than a step forward.
I think he is. Well, he says he's opposed, but I think he's a pragmatist, and and I think we forget how much power the states have to impose their own laws and rules. I think sometimes a British Prime Minister has more power than an American president, really, just because of the way the country's run.
Well, I'm going to have to stop you there, because we are lucky enough, by the wonders of technology, to be joined all the way from Cumberland, Maine, America, by Scott Thurston, who is a middle school teacher in America. Welcome to the show, Scott. Let's get straight into it now. Bernie Sanders seems to be growing in popularity, especially with the younger audience and the sort of lower middle classes. Is this down to his promises to push for free tuition and raise the national living wage?
Well, Bernie Sanders is a very exciting candidate. I think he really speaks to some of the problems that are facing our country. Education is far too expensive, and our younger people are feeling very frustrated, as well as the parents of these kids. So I think he's an excellent candidate. I'm not sure whether he can actually make his ideas come to happen, but it would be tremendous if he could.
I agree. There's a lot of speculation whether Bernie Sanders will actually deliver on his promise he has offered Americans. Chris, I think you have a question for Scott.
Yes, Scott, what do you think is the most important political issue at the moment?
Oh, the most important political issue for me, at least, is to try to restore our image across the world. I felt that this idea of our country being led by white men for years and years is a problem, and the fact that our military is sprawled out all across the world is a problem. And I really think Barack Obama has done a lot to restore our image, and I think that having a really well-qualified female candidate is a historic moment in our country's history. I really hope that we can get Hillary Clinton in there to be a really well-experienced face for our country and a spokesperson. And I think that's really an important thing for our country right now.
Well, thanks so much for joining us all the way from America, Scott. Do you have any final words for us in the studio?
Well, thank you for having me on your program. It's really exciting to have a voice. A lot of times we don't feel like anybody asks us our opinion, and many people judge our country based on whatever is the biggest tabloid headline or what is the latest obscenity Donald Trump might be sharing with the world. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks, Scott. Some really interesting points there from someone on the home soil. Now, an election wouldn't be an election without a bit of debate, would it? Over to Dom and Joe, who will be discussing Hillary Clinton's prospects in the race.
Should Hillary Clinton be the first female president? No.
Well, I'm not one to talk about written in the stars or fate or anything, but what you've got to think of in the perspective of popularity of is the significance of Barack Obama and how he became the first black president. And you could argue that that is a much grander thing than the first female president, especially with the history of the United States. Hillary Clinton, she has got a presidential name. Her husband is Bill Clinton, a very popular and mildly successful president in the 90s.
No, he was very successful. I'm a big Bill Clinton fan from what he did then. But you could equally argue, well, Jeb should be president because of George Bush and of other George Bush.
But if you look in the same perspective, however, you've got George Bush Sr., a one-term president.
Yes.
You've got George Bush Jr., who's been polled the least popular president, the least successful president in the history of the United States.
And you've got Hillary Clinton, who's been on the wrong side of history on every major decision.
Oh, of course. I think it's about rolling with the times and being democratic, however.
What, you think we should have a bad president just because she's female?
I'm not saying she'd be a bad president. I think she could be a rather good president, a rather strong president as well.
Looking at the past, she voted for the Iraq War. She voted consistently against equal marriage. On all major issues that she's dealt with. And she voted to deregulate the banks, which led to the financial collapse. Bernie Sanders didn't.
Of course, I'm not denying that, but I do think that this is another significant election. Much like 2008, Hillary is the strongest female candidate that we have. She's got a big name.
The only female candidate.
A strong voice. She's not the only female candidate, but she's by far the strongest. She's been at the very top of American politics for a very long time.
She's been in the public eye. That's not necessarily at the top of
in the White House. She's been in the White House,
yes.
And she'll know what to do. She'll know what it's like to be president. She's got a husband by her side who knows what it's like to be president.
Now, before we end the show, we have a quick look at today's newspapers. First up, we have the Financial Times here, and on page 8, they've got an interesting article, Obama rejects allegation economy is on the slide. And there's an interesting bit here that says, while populist candidates from both parties cater to what remains a fragile economic mood. This indicates that candidates such as Bernie Sanders are actually challenging America's current president, Obama's views. So there's a clash of heads there. So it's definitely worthwhile keeping up to see what the candidates have to say about the economy, because it's really quite interesting. Up next here we have The Guardian, and on page 17, Cruz and Rubio fight to challenge Trump as Republicans vote in Nevada primary. Now this is really, really interesting because the Nevada vote is actually happening today as we speak. And could Trump, this is very important because it's a swing state and it could challenge Trump's thing. We could talk about this forever, but that is all we've got time for on today's show. For any more information about the American election, interviews and the latest news, please go on our website, thestateofamerica.co.uk. Thanks for tuning in and see you next time. Good night.